Welcome to Scrolling to Death. Listeners are in for a treat today because I have Marc Berkman, CEO of the Organization for Social Media Safety. Hi, Marc. Thank you for being here.
Thanks for having me, Nikki.
I'm excited to have this conversation. Now, I want to hear about what got you into the space, but first, let's just generally go into, we're going to cover social media safety today. I want to focus on educating parents, what tangible steps we can take to keep our kids safe online. So just a very simple question I want to jump into is social media safe? I'd love to throw that to you.
That's an excellent starting point.
Right?
It's a very simple answer. It is not safe. And we know that by the clear evidence. So I'm not speaking in theory.
Mm-hmm.
It is not safe. There are children and adults that are clearly being harmed through social media use. There are harms that are being exacerbated through social media use, and that is not theoretical. Now, there are some harms that are being debated and analyzed via the research, where we feel like there is a significant amount of research suggesting that social media is causing those harms. And I'm on that sense speaking mostly about mental health harms. But to be clear, there are harms that are happening, and let's include cyberbullying in that list. Let's include human trafficking, drug trafficking, sexual predation, social media motivated violence, which I can speak more to in a second about what that really means. A long list of harms where there is no theory, there is no debate, and we are seeing literally millions, especially of children, harmed through this full range of danger.
Yeah. And, we started letting kids into the social media space, I don't know, maybe more than a decade ago. And we didn't realize that it was so harmful, right? Or was it harmful at the time and we just didn't realize it? Or is it sort of gotten more harmful as the platforms have evolved?
But again, the Organization for Social Media Safety is very evidence-based, strictly evidence-based in what we do.
Okay.
And the evidence would tell us that social media has gotten significantly more harmful as it's picked up more users and as the platforms have added new features that have turned out to be quite dangerous. So we've seen the harms escalate from cyberbullying, human trafficking, drug trafficking. I just went through the long list, but they're almost all going up, those harms, in correlation with more and more social media users and as time has gone on.
Well, our teenage, especially mental health, has gone down, down, down. And we just have, I don't know, the harms have just gone up, up, up. And to get these kids to stay on this the platform, they're serving more and more harmful content and all these things. But let's get into that in a moment. I want to know what got you into this space. I feel like a lot of people that work in this space didn't start in this space. Something happened personally or to a family member. But what is your story for coming in over to work in social media safety?
Sure. So I was chief of staff for an elected official in California, and there was an attack on a 14-year-old in our district. He was at a fast food restaurant with some friends after school. Another teen that he did not know came up behind him, hit him as hard as he could in the head, while the attacker's friends filmed it and they uploaded it to social media. So as I mentioned, social media motivated violence. These are acts committed for the purpose of filming them and uploading them to social media for notoriety, to get these likes, these shares, and these views that social media users have come to crave. And so I worked on legislation at the time with the victim's father, Ed Peisner, and we worked on legislation called Jordan's Law after his son. And while we were working on that legislation, it became very clear to me that there were all these other harms either caused or made worse because of social media. And I don't want to list them again to take up all the time. It's a long list.
Yeah.
But we saw all those harms, and we saw a real gap there in terms of the absence of a consumer protection organization focused exclusively on social media that could develop expertise on these harms, emerging harms, how they were evolving over social media to hurt consumers. just no one was doing that. And so we decided it needed to be done. We founded the Organization for Social Media Safety back in 2018 now.
Mm-hmm.
And unfortunately, the need is only, as you mentioned, has only grown. We're continuing to grow in size to meet that need. We have programming all over the country at this point. I could, if you want me to, I could get into how we approach our interventions, and we're trying to make social media safer
Mm-hmm.
for families across the world.
Yeah, let's do
So,
that at the end. But yeah, I definitely want to learn about that. So I think there's a disconnect for parents in, yeah, there's harms, but it's not going to happen to my child. And so, what are some of the things you've learned about how many children are being affected by some of these big issues on social media?
yeah, let's start with the most well-known danger here that's impacting children. That's cyberbullying.
Mm-hmm.
And we're finding through nationally representative surveys and our own work on the ground across the country with families that about 46% of fifth graders through 12th graders are being cyberbullied, self-report being cyberbullied over
Mm-hmm.
social media. That is millions and millions of children. And it's important to know that according to a good bit of research, that triples the risk of suicidal action among teens if you're cyberbullied over social media. And so very severe harms implicated there, and a whole range of other harms as well, including impact on academic achievement, anxiety, depression, eating disorders, all connected
Mm-hmm.
with cyberbullying. And so that is one of the most common forms of harm that we're seeing happen through social.
Mm-hmm.
Obviously, there's mental health impacts where studies suggest that social media is having a real impact on depression, anxiety, eating disorders again, and suicide. So there are correlations out there
Mm-hmm.
with what we would call excessive social media use and negative mental health outcomes. And I'm
Mm-hmm.
sure your audience well know is informed by the fact that the Surgeon General has
Yeah.
issued
Mm-hmm.
his own warning on these harms and the connection to social media. So
Mm-hmm.
mental health is a big piece impacting millions of children across the country.
Mm-hmm.
We have seen we need a lot more research on this, and I know you've interviewed guests on this issue as well. But drug trafficking was one that really wasn't a prevalent harm when we began this work. It
Mm-hmm.
emerged suddenly, as a lot of these harms do.
Yeah.
The last best study we have is that a quarter of teens are seeing drugs marketed over social media platforms. We think that number has only grown over
Mm-hmm.
time. That's about 3 years old, that study at this point.
Mm-hmm.
So drug trafficking, drug marketing, drug sales over social media is having an impact and leading to the death of children, especially with the spike in fentanyl being used to poison prescription drugs that are sold over social media. So that's
Yeah.
a big concern as well. I can keep going. There's a really long list,
Mm-hmm.
unfortunately.
In
Sextortion, the last one maybe I'll mention,
yeah.
5 to 10% of teens are being sextorted over social media. The FBI has issued
Mm-hmm.
warnings in recent years that number continues to go up. And
Mm-hmm.
so another really serious concern and danger being facilitated by social media.
Yeah. And you mentioned a lot of, this is some of these harms lead to death of the teen, whether that's through suicide or drug poisoning, all kinds of things. And that's the reason why, I saw this research, and I probably visited your website when I was prepping to launch the podcast and saw that this issue leading to deaths of young people, and which is why I named my podcast Scrolling to Death, because I really saw that connection. And you mentioned sextortion. Sextortion it's in the news a lot. Unfortunately, now a lot of suicide deaths. The latest a few days ago was reported an Australian boy was sextorted and died by suicide, all within a few hours. From first contact to death. And did you see? I think yesterday Meta made an update to their platform saying that they will blur nude images in the direct messages on Instagram. Um, but when you look past the headline, you can see that it's blurred, but you can just click on it and open it up and see the nude image. So how do you feel like the reactions are to the platforms to some of this bad press? Do you feel like it's just smoke screens and like headlines, or do you feel like they're actually helping to solve this issue around sextortion?
It's a really insidious strategy to delay while so many things are happening in the world. And if you can
Mm-hmm.
get past the initial headline with some talking points,
Mm-hmm.
that seems to be the strategy here. So, as you mentioned, this new safety feature to us seems to be, and we haven't been able to see it yet in the real world in action, but it seems to be a lot of smoke and mirrors. There's a lot of other steps
Mm-hmm.
that the platforms can take to be protecting children, and we shouldn't be afraid still to ask the question, especially for 13 and 14-year-old users,
Mm-hmm.
whether the risks or the benefits are outweighing the risks. And if we're talking about needing to take a move to protect 13-year-olds
Mm-hmm.
from sexual predators on their platform, it's a real question for the platform and for parents whether this is the right choice for our children to be spending 4, 5, 6 hours a day.
So, do you feel like with this specific update from Instagram, it got me thinking if they can detect nude imagery before it's sent or as it's sent and blur it, do you feel like teenagers and minors should even be able to see or receive or send nude imagery at all?
I mean,
Like personally,
first
do
of
what
all,
you've,
by
yeah.
the clear law in California, and I haven't reviewed all 50 states, but I'm going to assume all 50 states there, but give me some leeway on that.
Mm-hmm.
It's not legal for an adult to send a sexually explicit picture to a minor. So
Mm-hmm.
we're talking about felonies potentially happening here.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So should that be allowed? I would say no on the criminal level and kind of unanimous decision there on policy,
Mm-hmm.
but also, our uh, mode of operating is not, we're not moralizing here. We're really grounding this into what the research tells us about what is and is not harmful for children.
Mm-hmm.
Sending sexually explicit pictures to 13-year-olds and even 12-year-olds we know well are on those platforms.
Yep.
That does cause short and long-term harm in the children.
Mm-hmm.
It's not something that we should even questionably be allowing here or knowingly facilitating.
Right. Agree. So you mentioned some of the studies are self-reported. So you have to ask the kids like how, are you feeling depressed, things like that to get these results. But a lot of this data exists as far as like how much cyberbullying is happening on these social media platforms or how much predation. A lot of this data exists with the social media platforms. So how cooperative are the social media platforms in producing that data to researchers?
I would say on the whole, not very cooperative at all, unfortunately. They are the ones, as you mentioned, with the best bird's eye view of some of these concerns.
Right.
It's also why we developed legislation in Congress called the Chats Act that would update our criminal reporting system
Mm-hmm.
to specify when crimes happen in connection with a specific website. So right now, if someone is out on the street and gets assaulted, we get a report that goes up to the Department of Justice with that address. So we can say, hey, a lot of crime is happening in this particular area.
Mm-hmm.
Now, we all are now living in a virtual world,
Mm-hmm.
and the only thing that happens when a crime is connected to the internet is the law enforcement officials check the box and say internet. And so we need to have a better bird's eye view of what's happening on specific platforms so that we can hold them accountable. So drug trafficking, human trafficking,
Mm-hmm.
a range of actual criminal activity. The platforms are the only ones that have that view, and they generally keep it to themselves.
Right. And so I know we're working on some bills to allow us to get access to that data, but let's start with, we've reflected on the risks. Parents should know that social media can be harmful for teenagers and young people. But we're allowed to have them sign up as 13 without parental consent. And if they have a device, they can just click a box, however old they want to be, and sign up. So, what legislation, if any, has the government enacted currently or historically to protect kids from these addictive and harmful social media platforms?
Yeah, I mean, we're seeing a range of legislation being passed at the state level.
Okay.
Almost every single one of those bills is currently pending uh, court appeals or in a court case now.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, And so we've seen legislation pass here in California called, informally known as the Design Code Act.
Mm-hmm.
So that would require platforms to analyze their design features and give additional powers to consumers as well.
Mm-hmm.
Other legislation in California that would clarify the terms and conditions of social media platforms so that consumers can actually see how they're monitoring or moderating content, what they're considering to be harmful or not harmful. Another
Mm-hmm.
bill in California we've seen. You mentioned ages. So we've seen legislation in various states that would put an age limit on
Mm-hmm.
social media or age verification,
Mm-hmm.
where parents have to go on and verify their children's ages and that they give consent. And so we've seen a range of legislation to try to respond to this onslaught of severe pervasive harm that we're
Mm-hmm.
seeing.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, we're waiting for Congress to act right now, and it looks like they're getting ready to. We
Mm-hmm.
actually have a big congressional hearing this coming week
Mm-hmm.
on a number of really important social media safety bills. So I'm excited to see if we're able to move those in Congress. So those are really essential,
Mm-hmm.
ultimately, for protection of children
Okay.
on
And
social media.
I have some questions about those specifically, but you mentioned state-specific laws, and I know Florida passed a law that should go into effect in January, basically a social media ban for kids under 14. And then for 14 and 15-year-olds, you need to get parental permission to sign up. Do you have any, well, first of all, do you think that bill will, or that law will survive any lawsuits that will come from the social media companies in the meantime?
What I'll say is, I think lawsuits are definitely coming. I want to say they've already arrived,
Okay.
but they're definitely coming either way. So I'll say I think it's going to be a fight on that legislation and other
Mm-hmm.
bills, and it's class or similar bills. The platforms will do what they can to ensure that those types of laws are overturned. And
Mm-hmm.
so we're looking to see what type of precedent comes out of those cases, what the courts are going to say. I think that's going to be really important for the future of social media safety regulation here.
Mm-hmm. Okay. And if there's a bunch of different kind of state specific laws and then something happens federally, does that sort of like erase what happens state by state? Or how does that, is there conflict there?
It can. It
Okay.
can. So, to be too lawyerly, but it's something
Yeah.
called preemption. So you can have a federal bill preempt a
Okay.
state bill.
Okay.
And typically, and I would say in all the cases of the bills pending,
Mm.
they specify whether Congress specifies whether the bill they're passing preempts what a state may be doing in the area.
Okay.
So the short answer is they can, but it depends.
Okay.
I'll, one more sense on that. So they do, Congress does have the option of saying, this is going to be our floor safety level, but if a state wants to do something more in this field,
Mm-hmm.
they can.
Okay.
So Congress does have the option to do that. On some of the bills, they do that. Others, they just completely preempt.
Okay. And I want to talk about the bills that were introduced into the House, but just since we're talking about like age limits, do any of the current federal bills put an age limit that's different than the 13 on social media?
There are introduced pieces of legislation in Congress. There's one from Senator Schatz that would essentially do that. It's not one of the bills up for.
Okay.
We're in the House next week, but
Okay.
so far that bill is awaiting further action in Congress.
Okay. Okay. So what's happening next week? So bills have been introduced into the House. How does this work? Are they just discussing them? Are they going to vote on them? Like, what's the process for next week? Is it Wednesday?
Yes, next
Okay.
week is a legislative hearing, so that's where the committee, the group of members who are tasked with that specific policy area,
Mm-hmm.
they will essentially ask questions about these specific bills.
Okay.
The vote happens in another stage. So the vote happens in what's called a markup. That would be the next stage.
Okay. Who do they ask questions of?
they will have witnesses there to ask questions of the witnesses. They will make their own comments themselves.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, the members who are leading the effort will likely also be there as witnesses so they can answer questions on their own bills.
Okay. Are you attending?
I will be there.
Okay. So it's KOSA, the American Privacy Rights Act, Sammy's Law. Are those three? Am I right?
There is, yeah, those three are right. There's 9 in
Oh, there's
total, I
9.
believe.
Okay.
Yeah,
Okay.
there's 9 in total. So, which is encouraging. They're taking the bills that I think they're very serious about moving
Mm-hmm.
and examining them here for the
Okay.
next step.
Okay.
And I think it's
And
important to note too, most
yeah.
bills don't get a hearing in
Mm.
Congress. And so this is a very big, substantial step that they are taking, indicating that they're serious about passing something.
Okay. And then we probably won't see all 9 go for a vote to the next step, or we could.
Remains to be seen.
Okay.
Remains to be seen. And the timing is all up to the committee here on when that next step is and what
Mm.
the bills will be included. Sometimes they will combine bills, or there's a lot of options that they can do here.
Okay. Now, I've talked a lot about KOSA and Sammy's Law, but there's a new one. So, American Privacy Rights Act is new, right? Can you tell listeners about that bill?
Yeah, this is the bill that's led by the chairman of the entire Energy and Commerce Committee, Kathy
Mm-hmm.
McMorris Rogers.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, it's a bill that would provide additional privacy protections on social media platforms and internet sites. A very comprehensive, long bill that goes into a good bit of detail there. So they just released the discussion draft on that bill. So we're still going through it
Mm.
ourselves. It looks like it will be a really substantial benefit for the public,
Okay.
but everyone's still learning and discussing that. We'll also learn more on Wednesday at the hearing as well on that bill, and I assume that will take up. There'll be a good bit of focus on that in the discussion.
Okay. So is it helpful so I'll include information in the episode notes about these bills. Now, is it helpful for parents to, go to house.gov and reach out to their representative, asking them to support these bills at this point? Is that helpful?
Always helpful.
Okay.
It's always, as a former congressional legislative staffer, always helpful to have constituents weigh in on where they stand on bills,
Mm-hmm.
especially sharing your family's own personal stories.
Mm-hmm.
Can be very powerful when the staff reads the emails in. And most offices do really take the time to read the emails. They count up the number of support and opposed positions they get on different bills. So that
Mm-hmm.
is something that I would encourage people out there listening to do if you'd like to support any of these pieces of legislation.
Okay. I mean, before I was doing this work, I would have thought that wasn't even an option for me. It wasn't even a thought to reach out to my representative with any of my experiences. I don't think I would have thought I would be heard. So it's always nice to hear from people like you that our voice matters. And I've also heard things like, big tech has such a large pocketbook in fighting some of these bills, all of these related bills. And the only thing that will turn the tide is parent um, parent testimonials, parent support, because we're the constituents, right? And we elected you to support what would be helpful for us and our families. So is there anything else parents can do? I mean, I've been told send them to house.gov, put in your address, and you'll see where your representative or who your representatives are, and you can email them or call from there. Is there anything else you would recommend for parents?
I mean, again, as a former staffer, I always think that emails are more powerful than calls. There's
Okay.
generally a better system to log them in. Every office is like its own business and culture. So it
Mm-hmm.
is different in every office, but I would suggest emails over calls,
Okay.
personal stories. It generally, you have the most impact when you are a constituent of that particular member.
Mm-hmm.
members are not as concerned with people outside their district.
Okay.
And when we talk about money too, I think that's a really important point. When we talk about money in the system, what is that money for? That money funds ads to get people to vote for the politician that is running for office. Now, if all the parents in their district are telling the elected official to vote a certain way, that becomes far more powerful than the money, which is what they're trying to use to get people to vote for them. So
Right.
I think we need to remember that in this country, that at the end of the day, the elected officials do respond to pressure from the people voting for them.
Okay. Yeah. I've also heard, so some sites will sort of let you copy and paste a message and put it out to your representative. If the representative's office receives a lot of duplicated emails, do they sort of get put aside? I just was wondering from your perspective.
Again, every office is like its own world,
Right. Okay.
and operates potentially differently. But in my opinion, what happens most often is staff is taking those emails in, and if it's on a specific bill like Sammy's Law, they're adding up the number of support emails that they get in.
Okay.
Then gets showed to the member of Congress. So we've had 500 emails today in support of Sammy's Law, and those numbers at the end of the day are what make the difference. And so you can send in similar emails, and you're still having impact.
Okay.
For sure.
Do the representatives ever send out polls to us to give our support that way?
Some do. So some will have telephone town halls or virtual town halls that run polls. Some send out email polls, and they're certainly looking at those results when they get them in.
Okay, cool. All right, and that will be live streamed on Wednesday, likely? Usually they are.
I would assume so, yes.
Okay.
They almost always are.
Okay, great. Okay, before we move on, I just want to get your opinion on the TikTok ban and that legislation. And specifically, I know, I've covered this a lot and tried to educate listeners on what it actually is and what would happen if that passes. But what I was concerned about recently was that TikTok is serving pop-ups to users, prompting them to call their representatives and vote and ask them to vote no on the TikTok ban, and sort of getting these young users to do their political bidding. How do you feel about China, a Chinese company, kind of influencing American citizens to do political bidding that may be a national security risk? Like, how do you feel about that?
I wouldn't call it best practice. First of all, I do have very real concerns with that.
Yeah.
I also would not call this a TikTok ban bill, to be clear. This just requires divesting the company from ownership by the Chinese government.
Right.
And so I think even that term leads to conclusions that are not merited with what the bill is. So yeah, but I have real concerns there, and I share yours.
Yeah. Now, when I post about this on platforms like Instagram, I get a lot of comments saying, well, TikTok is where I get the news that the American government doesn't want me to know. How do you feel about that?
I would just disagree with that. I mean, it is a good source for misinformation and disinformation. I think there is a whole world of social media platforms out there and internet sites that are serving up plenty of forms of information protected by the First Amendment, some of which I agree with, some of which I don't as a person. I would not say that TikTok is either a good source for news or information, or B, the only source for a certain type of news or information that you can't find elsewhere.
Right.
And I think it does very much speak to the national security concerns that this bill is trying to address. And so a lot of people focus on the accumulation of user data here, which is very much a concern, and whether there's access, whether the Chinese government has access to that individual data.
Yeah.
But there's a second part that people talk about less, and that's control over the algorithm. So you talked about specific ads that are popping up from TikTok,
Mm-hmm.
but there's also control over the content that American users are seeing and how they're forming their opinions,
Mm-hmm.
uh, what information, what news is actually reaching them.
Right.
That is a tremendous, tremendous power that I think is a best practice. We don't even want the potential for a potential adverse government to have that power. So
Yeah.
it's really something I think we need to consider.
Okay. So suffice it to say, you're in support of that bill.
I'm in support of the bill.
Okay, great. Um, okay, before we get into a couple tips for parents, wondering just based off of your experience and your research, and maybe what decisions you would make for your kids, if you have any, like what platforms should we keep our kids just far away from as long as possible?
It's an excellent question. We get that probably every day, and
Mm-hmm.
it takes me actually into talking about what we call the lose-lose trade-off that parents are facing.
Mm-hmm.
And when I explain this, every parent's gonna understand it. So we see frequently third, fourth, fifth grades, too young even by the platform standards, most of the major ones.
Mm-hmm.
We see that third grader get onto Snapchat or TikTok,
Mm-hmm.
and pretty soon you have that entire class on the platform because
Mm-hmm.
this is how they are communicating. This is how they're conducting their relationships and their
Mm-hmm.
friendships. And so, as a parent, we have this really horrible decision of maximizing safety on the one hand
Mm-hmm.
and protecting our children on the other.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, our main intervention for that is working with the entire community to develop age of entry standards
Yeah.
where the whole community is approaching that together.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, in terms of general advice as to when parents should be allowing children onto various platforms,
Mm-hmm.
difficult to answer in the abstract because it really does depend upon the family's particular situation, the platform that we are talking about. But I
Mm-hmm.
would really urge parents to understand the full range of risks that threaten their children on each platform before they make that decision.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, though let me stress again, though, as a general matter, the platforms themselves, so Instagram, TikTok, Snapchat, they all say that they're too dangerous for children under 13. So
Mm-hmm.
we should at least be mindful of that piece.
Yeah. How do you feel about products like the Bark phone or the Gab phone where parents can very much limit the kids' access to certain platforms?
Yeah, I think we endorse Bark in general. Their software, their
Mm-hmm.
phone is a fantastic option
Mm-hmm.
for parents that are thinking about allowing their children onto a social media platform like Snapchat or TikTok, because the Bark phone does
Mm-hmm.
give protection for those platforms. So we do
Yeah.
really like those. Gab phone and the other range of safety phones that are just texting a few people
Mm-hmm.
or your parents are giving that accessibility. We really do recommend that to parents if they think that their child needs a smartphone for the under 13 set.
Mm-hmm.
So we encounter a lot of parents who are concerned about losing. They want that accessibility,
Mm-hmm.
and so they go right for the deluxe smartphone.
Right.
And to be clear, parents really need to be aware that very recent research, substantial research, shows that for every year earlier that a child gets a smartphone, there is a statistically significant increase in negative mental health outcomes. So
Mm.
anxiety, depression, suicidal harm, that goes up each year earlier from 19 on down to 6 that a child gets a phone. So there's a danger
Mm.
itself in giving that smartphone to a child. And these safety phones can be a really good choice if you just want connection without any of the other social media apps or apps. So we do
Mm-hmm.
recommend them. They all function fairly well, Gab phone and others.
Mm-hmm. And I want to clarify some of the language there. So when you say smartphone in that research, you probably mean iPhone and like Android, but just basically a phone that has no parental controls built into the phone.
Yeah,
Because
phones that allow.
Bark will call it, sorry, their product like a kid safe smartphone. So when I say smartphone, sometimes I want to clarify, like I mean iPhone here or kid smart, kid phone. I wish it wasn't kid safe, but more like teen safe, right?
Right, right. Yeah. So, I mean, Bark would fit in the category of a smartphone, but yeah,
Mm-hmm.
teen safe. So, it gives those options for social media use,
Mm-hmm.
but with even life-saving ability to provide parental supervision.
Mm-hmm.
So, I would class in the category of smartphone. The other, some of the others, it's really limited on the features. So, I would separate that. So, if
Mm-hmm.
you're giving a device where your child can call a set list of listed contacts,
Mm-hmm.
text a few limited contacts with time limits, and doesn't have the ability to get into the wider internet.
Mm-hmm.
Those are safer options just for being able to get in touch with your child.
Yeah, and there's like there's a light phone and Nokia. There's actually a site called Dumb Wireless that I found that has all the dumb phones. It doesn't have the kid safe like the Gab and Bark that we talked about, but even phones for adults, if you want to go for a dumb phone on your own, or just maybe during certain days you do your dumb phone and then you bring out your smartphone when you need it. Um, but yeah, I love that site that I found and wanted
The
to.
dumb phones are surging actually in
Yeah.
sales, and we love it. I mean, you still can do a lot of what you need to do if you
Mm-hmm.
just have calling and texting.
Mm-hmm.
We are waiting for research that shows how that correlates to mental health outcomes. We would
Mm-hmm.
obviously theorize that we're going to see better outcomes on those,
Yeah.
but we need to show parents the evidence there.
Right. I think we just got too far in the attachment to our phones, generally, even parents, and needing them for everything. My husband and I recently just started leaving our phones in our bedroom when the kids are home so that our kids literally never see us with our phones. If we need to go check, we come up into our bedroom. Now we're thinking we need a home phone because it's like if someone needs to get a hold of us, like a house phone, because through it's just a home phone, right? Is that the right word?
No, yeah, the
Like a home,
landline.
the landline. That's the
The
word I was looking
landline,
for.
yes. Who has
Jesus
those
Christ.
anymore? We don't even. I don't have one.
We're gonna get one because, and I'm gonna
Love it.
try it out but we did get one a few years ago, and we just got a bunch of spam calls, and so we stopped. But I feel like since now we're putting our iPhones upstairs, it's like try the landline, just give it to the family. If something crazy happens, they can get a hold of us. But it's been wonderful just being disconnected. And I just hope to see a shift to more like simple phones. Like we don't need to be so connected into this technology and not using our brains, and then showing our kids that they don't need to use their brains.
Yep. No, I love it. I should have a landline
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
in
I
my
know, right?
actually, I think we have one that we've never used, but
Yeah.
I think it's important for your listeners too to again ground that in the fact that the research shows that there's real active harms
Mm-hmm.
happening here, and even the ones where we haven't proven causation, we would urge a safety first approach
Mm-hmm.
in how we're thinking about this, because a decade from now, it's going to be too late for a lot of people. Those harms have been done. And
Mm-hmm.
so I really do appreciate it. It's not that we're anti social media or anti technology,
Mm-hmm.
but
Right.
let's look at how we can best use technology safely. Let's look at what the data is telling us
Mm-hmm.
about the harms that are happening now. So
Mm-hmm.
yeah, I appreciate that, and I would add that bit about the evidence.
Yeah. Have you read Jonathan Haidt's book, Anxious Generation?
I am almost done with it.
Okay. How do
Yeah.
you feel about his 4 new norms that he recommends?
I we really like Jonathan Haidt's stuff.
Yeah.
We since he started his blog and his research. I
Mm-hmm.
mean, we read all of those religiously. So
Mm-hmm.
I think we would, in the new norms he's proposing. Um, hasn't gone through all the internal approval processes at the Organization for Social Media Safety, but I would
Mm-hmm.
say we would tend to be very supportive of
Mm-hmm.
his proposal here. And
Okay.
so there is some debate on his general theories as well, and we
Mm-hmm.
think they're very sound and evidence based.
Yeah, I agree. But there is some pushback. I've seen some LinkedIn posts and some articles with trying to debate his research or his aggregated research. And I just want to note too, get your insight on. I've seen some articles that are so pro social media, and then I've been able to sort of find some kind of link to or support from a big tech company in that research. Is that something we should just be, parents should keep an eye on and just be aware of, that sometimes pro social media research is big tech funded?
Yeah, I mean, I think we talked at the beginning about the talking point machine, and this is
Mm-hmm.
a part of it. And it's directly from the tobacco playbook back in
Mm-hmm.
the day, where they're funding research
Mm-hmm.
that clearly is not unbiased research. It also does, it's not always announced too in the conflict of interest pieces in some of the research we found.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think people need to be very wary of not just looking at a headline, but actually either coming to an organization like us, another organization in the field,
Mm-hmm.
and looking to see what we have to say after we've digested the whole research, looked at the funders and the conflicts of interest and
Mm-hmm.
the validity of the findings. And we take research where it lies, because we're here to learn and present by the evidence.
Mm-hmm.
If something shows that there is a concern that isn't as much of a concern as we thought, we will
Mm-hmm.
take that data point.
Yeah.
But unfortunately, a lot of the research that's dispersed by the industry uh, is overstated, has poor methods,
Mm-hmm.
or hides some other adverse findings. And so I
Mm-hmm.
think consumers really need to be wary about that.
Yeah. And it can even be from outlets that you would think are legitimate. Like one article is Oxford University, and me and Hannah Ortel over at Delay Smartphones like tracked it back. We're like, this is from a guy that has a huge stake in Meta. Like, huh?
There, I know the paper you're talking about. We do have concerns with those findings. Absolutely.
Okay. Cool.
Yeah. And I would also be wary of some of the orgs out there operating in the name of internet safety, social media safety, digital
Mm-hmm.
citizenship.
Mm-hmm.
There's a good number of these that are directly funded by the industry. And we think that's really problematic, because you have to be able to speak without a conflict of interest and
Mm-hmm.
be able to point out when a platform is promoting features that we know are too dangerous for children. So
Mm-hmm.
people really should be wary of those advocacy organizations and
Mm-hmm.
nonprofit organizations out there.
Yeah.
And again, we don't take a cent of funding from the social media industry or the safety software industry.
Thank you for that, because it's just hard to believe what you're reading when it can be skewed so many ways. And okay, so the Organization for Social Media Safety, tell me about what you guys' mission is and what you're working on.
Sure. So we are the leading national consumer protection organization focused exclusively on social media. That means
Mm-hmm.
that our mission is to protect against all social media related dangers. And
Mm-hmm.
we won't go through the list again for
Mm-hmm.
your listeners.
Yeah.
So we do that using a classic consumer protection model, which is a fancy nonprofit way of saying that we have 3 departments working to make social media safer for families. So we
Mm-hmm.
do education work. We are in K through 12 schools across the country teaching essential social media safety skills for
Mm-hmm.
students, parents, and educators.
Mm-hmm.
And if you're interested in that, you can go to our
Yep.
website and getting us to your school.
I am.
We conduct research in an ongoing partnership with UCLA School of Education. So really groundbreaking research to answer some of the questions that we were talking about
Mm-hmm.
today when it comes to social media safety. We do advocacy work. So from Congress on down to local school board level, we are working on public policies that improve social media safety.
Mm-hmm.
And then finally, technology. So working on software and apps that provide real-time protection against any and all social media related dangers, and especially making sure that the public is informed and aware of those options.
Okay. And thank you for the work you're doing with schools. I've been interviewing teachers lately about the effect of smartphones, kids having smartphones in class, but also school-issued device use and what they're getting access to on the school-issued devices. And I'm just seeing such a lack in understanding on the parental side of what's happening in the classroom. And I'm trying to sort of bridge that gap in understanding between the two. So um, I I'm personally going to look into the student or the school programs that you are offering and the presentations. Um, if a parent were to go on your website, would they just simply I could send this over to my school and be like, I'm interested in you guys implementing one of these programs?
Yeah, we have a web page that
Mm-hmm.
explains all of our school-based services. We do student presentations, parent workshops. We do
Mm-hmm.
consulting with the school as well. So that's um, right in our website there at socialmediasafety.org.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Anything else you want to share with parents today? I'm going to try to get this up before the hearing on Wednesday so that since it's, so timely. So anything that we should know going into the hearing or anything else that comes to mind?
Yeah, I would really focus parents, and you are doing such an important part of this work. I would focus parents on the fact that despite the recent surge in press stories here, the
Mm-hmm.
hearings in Congress that we're seeing now, there's still a lack of understanding of how severe and pervasive these harms are, especially for children.
Mm-hmm.
And having an understanding of that is really an important part of this battle to keep everyone safe. So I would really highlight that.
Okay. And thank you for all the research that you're doing to help make it more clear to parents on what those harms are, and for all the work you do to help keep our kids safe. And on behalf of the parents, thank you so much, Mark.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me.
Of course.